it's best to discuss referencing, paraphrasing, and plagiarism together, because discussing the referencing on its own does not do the writing process any justice. So let's begin. So the first thing I think it's quite important to do is to recognize that there are actually two types of plagiarism. There's technical plagiarism, which is not serious, but may happen by accident. And it's best not to do it, but there's nothing serious about it. And then there's exact copy plagiarism, which is very serious. And in the worst case, the university could ask you to withdraw, ask you to leave. That's the worst case. That doesn't, don't get me wrong, that doesn't happen a lot, but it's possible. So obviously then it's useful to know when you're just making a small mistake that doesn't mean anything and when you're doing something really serious. So technical plagiarism is just not acknowledging the work or ideas of someone else, but your work is paraphrased. Your work is properly paraphrased. So just at this point, paraphrasing, obviously you'll know this, is changing something into your words, looking at something that's written one way, and then you write it down in another way that reflects what was previously written, but it's not the same. So when you do that, you may do something like, if you have the citation, you'll have, okay. So this is a bit in your text. You see that Smith 2021, that's the bit in your text that is what we call a citation. You have to have that every time that you write something. There has to be in the text to say that. So you might say that referencing is dead important, Smith 2021. Now, if you forget to put that in, if you forget to put that citation in and that disappears, and you've just got the text, then that's technically plagiarism, because you're not acknowledging where you got what you've written from. So every time you write something from a source, you put in that citation type thing in the text. Okay, so that's technical plagiarism. If the person marking your essay sees this, they'll put ref in, right? That's one thing they might write. Or they might say, says who. Now, both of these are just them telling you. So if you see that in kind of comments, ref, it means you're missing the citation. Or if they say says who, that's a bit, I think that's a bit more sarcastic when they say, ooh, says who. But the both of them just mean you're missing your citation. But that's it. It's not referenced the best it could be, but it's nothing serious. Okay. Exact copy plagiarism, as it says here, is trying to pass off the work or ideas of someone else as your own. And what that involves is cutting and pasting. That would be somebody who looks at somebody else's essay and says, I'm just going to cut and paste that in, or I'm just going to copy it word for word, or I'm going to do. And even if you change one or two words, if it can still be seen to be very, very close to it, then that can be exact copy plagiarism. And that's very serious. So if you're cutting and pasting other people's work in, that's a big no-no. And if you get caught, that's very serious. That's the importance. So the reason I point that out is people just think if you get caught for plagiarism, you get thrown out of the university, which isn't, it's not usual. It's not really the case. But if you're doing technical plagiarism, you're never going to get thrown out of the university. So if you suddenly, it's just for those folk that forget a citation and they wake up in the middle of the night and say, oh, I'm going to get thrown out of university. These are two very different types of plagiarism. So just remember, it's when you cut and paste other people's work. I'm not saying you do, but that's the serious one. Forgetting to put in a citation is nothing. So what do you do to avoid accusations of plagiarism. Well, obviously, paraphrasing, changing things into your own words, that protects you from exact copy plagiarism because you're writing it as you see it and converting it into your own words, and that protects you from that. Which may also mean summarizing something. So taking something that's 50 words and turning it into 20 words is summarizing, which is a form of paraphrasing. Because generally when you summarize something, it doesn't reflect what it was before. And of course, the second thing you do is you reference properly. And if you do that, then you avoid technical plagiarism. So referencing, at this point, I think it's useful to say that referencing does three things, that it does the job it's supposed to, but it also allows the person marking your work to give you more credit for what you're achieving. And it allows markers to reward people who have worked hard on their essays, have read widely on their essays, and have thought about the references they're bringing in. And if you don't reference properly, you can't allow that to happen. You can't give the marker that possibility. So the first thing that referencing does, it does the thing it's supposed to. It shows the person who's reading it, or your marker or your tutor, that you have acknowledged the ideas or information by giving credit to the original author, by putting in that citation, Smith 2021, or wherever it may be. Okay, so that's the formal thing it does. That's what it's supposed to do. The other thing is referencing can show the marker that you have researched your topic thoroughly and have read relevant sources of information. So if you don't put in enough citations and let us know where you've got what you've written is from, we can't give you credit for using an appropriate source. If everything's well detailed and you tell us what sources you've used in the references up the back in the reference list, then we can't make judgments on that and give you extra credit for what you've chosen to do. And what I mean is, if you take a reference list, so you've got the big list at the end of your essay, which is full of all the references you've used, you could give just the reference list to somebody in your module, a tutor or the module leader, and say, what do you think of this reference list? And they can make judgments. Like, they can say, wow, this is a really comprehensive reference list. There's at least 20, 25 references on these. I'm looking at who they've referenced, and these are all really good sources. I think that whoever's chosen these references can write a really good essay. So that's one thing they could say. Or they could look at the reference list and go, there's only 10 things here. There's only 10 references, and they might say, which is not going to, no matter how well this person does, it's not going to allow them to express or answer the question they've been asked, because they don't have enough information at their fingertips to do that, to structure and give the content that's really going to do justice to this. And that's before they've read the essay. The reference list is helpful to them to understand and evaluate potentially what the essay is going to be like. So that's giving them that information and showing that you have managed to find 20 or more references for something, and they all have a place and they've all told something. And the quality of those references, they're all academic journals or textbooks. There's not too many websites. There's not too many, low-level references. They're all high-quality references. Again, says that you've addressed the point in academic writing, which I discussed at the start, which is your writing is rigorous. Your writing is highly accurate and uses high-quality information. And the reference list will show you whether you've got high-quality references or not. So all of that gives the person the ability or the possibility of giving you extra marks or being able to mark you. If your referencing is not up to scratch and you've missed references out and you don't have them in, then you deny them the ability to do that, they can't do it because they don't know where the writings come from. Also, referencing tells you the in-text citations. In-text citations tell the reader exactly which sources you have read and which sources you have used to support specific statements in your work. So we know where you've decided to use a reference. And again, that can be judged. And if you use the right reference in the right place to say the right thing, then again, we can acknowledge that and you might get marks for that. So there is an amount of marks that are wrapped up in how well you've referenced to allow us to give you marks, I guess is the point I'm making. So here's a piece of, on the left in this is a piece of text with 3 references in it. And on the right is the reference in the reference list. These are citations. These are what we call citations. They're the thing in the text. And that's your full reference here. So what can we say about it? So you'll notice that the citation in the text basically just has the surnames of the writers and it has the year. Surname of the writer, the year, surname of the writer, the year. And basically that says that this piece of writing here has come from this piece of writing here has come from this reference, and this piece of writing's come from this reference. And then what it also does is the Anderson itself then becomes a signpost to the reference up the back. Now the reference up the back to kind of show everybody what you've used, but it's also, if I wanted to read any of the books that you've referenced, if I wanted to go and check something, if I wanted to go and look at that book, you've given me the information to do so. That's part of the process of referencing, that you tell us where you can find the books. So everything that's in this reference here, shows me or helps me how to find the book. And it's that combination of the citation in the text and the reference up the back. The references are all alphabetical. They always do them A to Z. And the reference up the back only appears once. So even if I had used Anderson like 10 times in an essay, there's only one Anderson reference. So you don't put the reference in every time you use it. Oh yeah, one other thing. That's right. There are more things about citations that it's useful to know. I'm just doing a general thing. So sometimes you'll notice here, the name is outside the brackets, and here the name is inside the brackets. So inside the brackets, outside the brackets. The reason that the name is outside the brackets sometimes is because that name is being used as part of the sentence. If you look at the sentence, it says, Anderson states that plagiarism is a serious concern within universities. So in this case, it's been decided to use the name of the person as part of the sentence. If you look at the first sentence, it just says, referencing is extremely important. You must include references in your work every time you refer to a source of information. Then Smith and Jones is in brackets. Now, the way to kind of negotiate that or understand or remember those two things is anything in brackets in an essay to do with citations is silent. So you don't say, when I get to the end of the sentence, I don't say Smith and Jones 1992. I just skip over that. When I say the next sentence, I don't mention 1980, I just say Anderson states. So if you're using the name, it has to come out of the brackets so it can be said. That's why it happens. You always have the choice whether to use the name or not as part of the sentence. So you can choose to say, this is the person who said this, Smith said this, and Wilson said that, Freud, Marx said these things, Einstein said this. Or you may want to concentrate more on what they've said or the claim they're making, and you can just say that without the name. The choice is yours. My argument would be is mostly you wouldn't use the names. Mostly you would just try and write what you're trying to write. and whoever said it doesn't really matter. But occasionally there'll be something important that you want to make sure we know who said that. So you'll say it was Armstrong that first said this, that, and the next thing. It was Wilson that first, because maybe it's something very important or very central. When you make a general point, if you use multiple references, that strengthens your point, but it also does a couple of other things as well. It strengthens your point, but it also shows you how thoroughly and how widely you're reading. And both of those can add to the marks in your essay. So what we have here is this statement. Many scholars explain the need for strategic planning in tourism and hospitality management. Because you've put many scholars, I would always expect there to be several references. So you can't say many scholars and then just put one reference and don't bother with the others. Okay, it has to be many, but you can do that. So when you get three references who are saying the same thing, it just means that there's a lot of people think this way, and therefore you're making a stronger point. It's not just one person. I've found 3 people, 4 people who all agree on this, and that strengthens your point. But the other thing it does is it lets the reader know that you're comparing texts and that you're reading more than one text to understand something. And that's impressive to the person reading your work. So multiple references, you don't need to do them all the time, but I'm looking at that saying, what I'm thinking is, here's somebody who's taken the time to look at 3 sources in relation to one point, and then combine and synthesize them and make something that they all agree on, which tends to be more, to get 3 people to agree on something, the statement is going to be more general. It's quite a simple statement or a more general statement, but they all agree on it. If you can do that every now and again, it's reflecting on the effort you're putting into your writing as much as it's saying, strengthening the academic point. And that's, so at this point, I just want to discuss, talking about referencing up the back, the reference list, that to produce a reference here, there are certain elements that must be included. So I've lifted this from some Harvard reference guide. And the thing with reference guides is they give you an explanation of the reference. In other words, they say, these are all the things that you need to include in your reference. In this case, this is just a book with a single author. So a book with a single author, you've got the author's surname and their initials. You've got the year of publication must be in it. The title must be in it in italics. If it's not the first edition, then you have to say which edition it is, 2nd, 3rd, 10th, 11th. And then you must also have where it was published and who published it. So they always give you an example. That can be a bit difficult to visualize, I guess, would be the thing. So then they'll give you an example, and then you can, I've color coded this. So you wouldn't get color coded in a reference guide usually. But what I can do is I can say, there's the name, there's the year of publication, there's the title in italics. This is the 2nd edition. It was published in Glasgow, and it was published by Pierce Press. So I know that this matches up. So I know it's got all the elements and I can see them written out. The other important thing that you get with this is the punctuation. Any punctuation you see in the explanation will appear in, so you've got a colon here, and that'll appear in the colon after Glasgow, and full stop there. There's a full stop after study skills guide, so you can do that as well. So the punctuation that's involved in the reference should always be in the explanation as well, so you know how to punctuate it. So that's a book. And the other thing I want to do is by showing you a journal article and how to reference a journal article, what I'm saying is not everything is the same amount of the same element. So this is an article in a journal. Now you will see that some things are the same. They've got the author's surname and initials. They've got the year of publication. They talk about the titles, although there's 2 titles in this one, and there's only one title for the book, but I'll explain that. And then they've got different things. They've got volume number and part number, because that's how a journal article, journals are laid out. And that's what you need to know to go and find it. As I said earlier, all of this is to help you find the book on the shelf in the library. So it's not so much you want the publisher or whatever, but you want the journal, the name of the journal, and you want the number and the part number. And then you want the printed pages, the pages of the contribution as well. So all of that's there. And you can see that, again, you can match it off. Here's a surname, here's a publication, here's the title of the article and the title of the journal. And I could explain, I'll briefly explain that you'll notice that the title of the journal is the thing that's in italics, because that's the thing you're looking for in the shelf. When you look on the shelf for the book, this title here, well, this title will not be there visible, but the journal will be, and then the volume number, number 8, and the part number, number 2. And then you can look inside that one and you'll get the printed pages where the article actually is. It's all the information to find it, basically. If you're doing a PDF, that will be laid out slightly differently. If you're doing a report, that will be referenced slightly differently. If you're doing a piece of law, a government act, a diary, wherever you're getting it from, there will be a way to reference almost each and everything possible. So make sure that you pick the right way to lay it out. Of course, that's if you're doing it from scratch. The important thing to say is there is RefWorks and other technology out there that can produce references for you. It can be very helpful for you. RefWorks is a referencing program, application, whatever, that will create references for you quite quickly once you set it up. The library promotes it, and I would encourage you to look into seeing if you can get RefWorks set up for yourself. The one thing I wouldn't use to try and create references is the thing in Word. In Microsoft Word, there's this application that says you can put citations in, the citations and references in. I don't think it's very, personally, it's just me, I don't think it's very good. I don't think it reflects a good standard of Harvard referencing, and I wouldn't use it. But that's just my opinion. So one of the final things I want to say about Harvard reference specifically is that there are different styles of Harvard, and you should not mix them. You should pick a style of Harvard to use and always use that style for any assessment. So when we look at these this is the same reference. All of these are Harvard styles. They're all acceptable. You could use any one of these three and you wouldn't have a problem with it. But what you definitely want to do is you would never mix styles. You'd never have one reference done this way and then another reference done this way and then possibly another reference done this way. You pick one. If you say, this is the one I'm using, always use it. If you're picking the middle one, always use it. And I want to show you the differences. The differences are, this one's in block capitals, this one isn't. This one uses initials. This one uses the full name. This one's got the year in brackets. This one doesn't. This one says 12-1 for volume 12, number 1, and this kind of says it in a more full way. Okay, this one underlines the title of the journal. These two both put it in italics. Okay, now I'm just saying these are the differences you can have. This one doesn't even have the part number. Oh, I can't do that, right? Right, so these are the differences. We don't mind if you pick a style. I don't think we really mind what style you pick. There may be some preference for GCU Harvard, but I don't think it's spelled out anywhere, so I don't think they can bake here. So you can pick a style and use that. If you have RefWorks, GCU Harvard is part of all of the different styles. RefWorks lets you pick what style of Harvard you want to use. It recognizes there's different styles. But what I'm saying is don't mix them. The academics really don't like that. The thing about this is that it's consistency. So whatever one you decide to use it and stick with it. Quotes are paraphrasing. When do you quote? When do you paraphrase? Well, a simple answer for me is mainly you're going to be paraphrasing. By far, the vast majority of your essay, report, or whatever will be you changing things into your own words. But let's discuss when to use quotes and also the things that are problematic about overusing quotes and the difference between quotes and paragraphs. So the way I see it, and again, I think this is my opinion, but I found a lot of agreement with this amongst other staff and academics, that you don't overuse quotes. That's the first thing. Don't overuse them. Use them infrequently. So, if you've got, I wouldn't really want to see many more than maybe like half a dozen quotes in a whole essay or a whole report, and that's maybe the upper limit. But the important thing is, so you don't use them too frequently. You use them occasionally, and if you find several points where you can use them and you use them properly, then that's fair enough. But for me, the important thing is you use a quote to complement your writing. You don't use a quote to say something. You kind of use a quote to help support your writing, to put in. So what I would say is, usually when I used a quote, I would have written something, maybe, half a page or 2 paragraphs or a paragraph. And I've tried to explain some feature or some function. But during my reading, I've come across some academic who has said something, written it very well with a few words, and they've basically summed up what I've been trying to say in a paragraph. And what I do is I put that at the end and say, so I'll say my point. So say I'm talking about the control of newspapers being related to a few people. The power and control exerted by the media, and I'd say that, and I've taken a paragraph, and then I read a quote from somebody who kind of sums it up in a way that kind of reflects what I'm saying. What's just been said is eloquently summed up by this quote from whoever it is. Or the other way you would do it is you state the quote, and then you try and explain what the person's saying in the quote, and you unpack it, and you bring more to it, and you make it more clear, and you bring understanding to it. The basic thing is, if you match a good quote to what you've paraphrased, then it shows us that you really understand it. If you can successfully unpack a quote and explain a quote in your own words that makes sense, then you're telling us you understand what you're talking about. You'll get marks for that. Or if you write something in your own words and then you get a quote that matches it and supports it, you'll get marks for that, because the quote is a complementary thing to show you, to say that because I put this quote with this piece of writing, I know what I'm talking about, the understanding's there. And that's what you want. That's what we want you to show, is that you understand what you're writing about. So like when you use an example, using a quote does that. Also, definitions, that's another good one. When you're quoting definitions, so say you talk about, you're trying to define media analysis, I guess, for example. So you're trying to explain media analysis. There'll be different definitions of what media analysis does. Somebody might be tempted just to put in one and say media analysis is, this person says, quote, media analysis is this. What I would recommend is that if you refer to more than one definition and then discuss the similarities and differences, you're going to demonstrate a deeper understanding of what that concept is. Especially if you get those concepts that people say, this concept is not easy to define. This concept has various meanings. Please don't ever go, I'm not going to try to attempt this because it's too complex. You won't get any marks for that. But if you say, let's look at a couple of the different definitions of this difficult to understand concept, and then you compare them and you see some people think of it this way, some people think of it that way, some people think of it this way, then that's going to get you marks because you're trying to understand what it is, and all you're doing is you're showing us the differences. But if you can do that well, then you're going to get marks for that. So these are a couple of key things when you're using quotes, and definitions are usually quotes. So here is a quote. Quotes are exactly as they're written, and then what you do is you put in these quotation marks, and that's how we know it's a quote. So that's the subtle code that this is a quote. This is exactly. So you can't be, if you quote somebody, you can't be done for exact copy plagiarism because you're doing it on purpose. And you're saying this is from Adams, and it's direct. You're saying this is a quote. The other thing to remember is you have to put the page number in, which I've highlighted in purple here. You don't do it in purple. I'm just pointing that out. So you've got the name, the year, and the page number if it's a quote. Oh yes, sorry. But the final point I want to make here is if you use a quote to replace what you were going to write. In other words, I don't know. If you get to a difficult point in your essay and you're struggling to paraphrase it and you put a quote in instead, that's not healthy. And what some people may be thinking now is they're looking at this going, oh, I could put all the quotes. I could cut and paste all the quotes in, 20 quotes. I could write my essay much quicker. It would save me a lot of paraphrasing. That would be dead good. No, because after a certain amount of quotes, the person marking your essay will say or ask the question, who is writing this essay? Are you writing this essay? Are you trying to get the academics to write this essay? By overusing quotes and not explaining what the quote's saying, but just using it to replace your paraphrasing. So we don't like that. And if we see that, it's going to affect your mark. Because as soon as you put a quote in, we don't know if you understand the quote. We don't know if you understand. So your understanding's not coming out like your understanding would come out if you're paraphrasing. Because you cannot paraphrase unless you understand something. I just wanted to, this is just very brief. So here's a quote. So that's one way you could put something in. Home ownership is one of the primary ways that households can build wealth. Preferably, you're going to paraphrase it, and you can either paraphrase it with names or paraphrase it, with names in the sentence or names not in the sentence. And that just kind of sums up what I was saying earlier on. You could say Smith and Wilson believe that owning a home is a key form of wealth creation, or you can say it's asserted that owning a home is a key form of wealth creation. The choice is yours on how you do it. But that's it. And the thing is, I do believe that my paraphrase is adequate. I think it's saying the same thing, but I think it's written differently enough that it's not going to be a problem. You can see that there is some, the home ownership and owning a home, there's similarities there, and there's similarities between wealth. There's you can see that there's linkages between these points, but there is differences as well, and that's successful paraphrasing. So key simple points about paraphrasing: ineffective attempts to paraphrase can lead to accusations of plagiarism. One of the most common things that people think is plagiarism, that think is paraphrasing, and it's not, is like taking a paragraph and changing 3 words, or taking a sentence and changing 2 words and saying, I'll put it in as it is, but I'll change a couple of words. That's not paraphrasing. That's taking something and changing a couple of words. Appropriate paraphrasing is structural change as well as language change. And hopefully, the other thing is paraphrasing should involve some kind of summarizing. And the reason I'm saying that is when somebody's writing a book or a journal article, they have a much bigger word count than you do for your 2,000 word essay. Ain't nobody writing a journal article in 2,000 words. So they can be more expressive, they can go into more detail. You don't have the luxury of that detail within your essay. So some of the time you're paraphrasing because you're trying to summarize or make the point more concise. Take the detail out of it, but still make the point. The good thing about summarizing and trying to summarize is that forces you to paraphrase. That forces you to think about what you're writing, and then that writing's more likely to come from yourself and the way you've constructed. So these are the four main things that may be useful or helpful to think about when you're trying to paraphrase. When you're reading a passage, first of all, just to try to understand it as a whole, try and understand it as what is it saying, because that can sometimes be the general way you get your paraphrase. And rather than stopping every 2 seconds and underlining something or writing down an idea or a phrase, just take the whole thing and see what are they saying here. That's the first thing. The second thing is you can be selective. So you can choose and summarize material that helps you make the point in your paper. You can really do that. The example I have is one person whose essay I was reading, they had an essay to do about tax. But every now and again he would say, and this has an influence on tax and VAT and blah, 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 and tax and VAT. And I'm saying, why are you talking about VAT? Because the question's specifically about tax. And he said, well, the source I was reading, it always mentioned the two together. So that's at that point, I said, well, you don't need it. The VAT part is not relevant to the question. So you can cut that out. You can take that away, and you can manipulate that text positively to closely reflect what you've been asked for. So you can be selective. And again, trying and, so that, you summarize it, you can say, this is not relevant, this is relevant, I will take that. And the point for that is you're taking from books that have not been written to answer your question. So there will probably be, you'll have to change the way you use it anyway, okay? So the third thing, thinking of what your own words would be if you were telling someone who's unfamiliar. So if you're talking to your parents or your friends or what I would like to think is another student, how would you say that to them? And I think there's room for simplification. There's room of making what you're writing more accessible when you're writing. Don't think that you have to use all the big words that academics use. Some of them you will have to, and I'll go on to that. But a lot of the time, academics use big words. But for me, there's reasons for this. Now, as I've always said, what an assessment is really about is showing us that you understand what you've been taught in the lectures, in the modules. When you're trying to explain something, for me, if you can get that understanding out, that's the main thing. So the way I would pitch this, if you're writing an essay trying to explain what's going on somewhere or trying to do something, I would say, I would pretend I'm writing this essay for another student and trying to explain to another student what's going on. Because if you pitch it at that level, you're going to include a bit more explanation of things or examples of things to help what you're showing more understandable. But that lets the marker know that you have the power to do that. And writing more simply is not detrimental. Einstein, I love quoting Einstein, and I only do it once. Einstein said, "It is only somebody who really knows what they're talking about that can explain it simply." So it's not actually maybe the easiest thing to do to write simply or to write accessibly. But if you can do that, it's very powerful for the person reading to say, this person really understands, because they're able to make complex things simple or accessible. And the other thing is, when I say don't use big words, there's a thing called shared language, which apparently I can't highlight. Oh, right. There's a thing called shared language. which is certain words you can't paraphrase. So if you're talking about pluralism, you can't really talk about pluralism any other way. If you're talking about meritocracy, there's certain words you've got to use: a discourse, a narrative. These are ideologies. There's certain words, shared language, you're going to have to continue to use, but for everything else, for the linking up, there are perhaps words that you can simplify. So basically, the do's of paraphrasing is there are some unusual words that you should try and remove. So try to restate all the main points that you need, but exclude the ones you don't. Most critical, important of all, express the main ideas in your own words. Try and look for that. If I was telling my pal about this, you're never going to speak to them in that academic tone. You should be formal, don't get me wrong, there's no slang, it should be formal, it should be professional, but there's still room. There's just some academic books I so enjoyed reading because I think they could do this, and other academic texts I'm sure you're aware of that you don't like reading because they're so impenetrable. Right, express the points concisely, and this may mean summarizing, but try to avoid using the same sentence structure. Try to avoid always using the same words as the original, and definitely try to avoid, or don't, that's the one thing, don't copy pieces of the original text, because down that road, there lies problems. Sometimes there's things you don't need to reference, because just like everybody knows. So if you're looking, the thing is, I don't think there's a lot of common knowledge you use in your essays. Your essays are quite academic and they don't have to. But occasionally you might be, do I need to reference the fact that I'm saying Boris Johnson's the Prime Minister of Great Britain? No, everybody knows that. That's not, you don't need to back that up. Strong factual things that are commonly known, you don't need to reference. Just be aware of that. What you would need a reference for is to back up if you made the claim that Boris Johnson was a complete idiot or Boris Johnson was a genius. But then you would need a reference. Then you would need, because that's a different claim and that's a more, or our currency is the pound, or, that kind of simplistic stuff. Okay, that's us.